Blanca is one of New York City's most exciting dining destinations. This 12-seat intimate restaurant is tucked away behind Roberta's in Bushwick, and it has been earning rave reviews from food media and diners alike. It was recently named the #2 restaurant in all of New York City by the New York Times. And we are here with executive chef Victoria Blamey and chef and co-owner Carlo Mirarchi. Thank you both so much for sitting down with Forbes.
Thanks for having us.
So Carlo, let's go back to the beginning of Blanca. This opened in 2012. What was your vision at the time, and how has that changed for the 2024 iteration?
So Blanca had started initially as a tasting menu I was doing inside of Roberta's. Chef David Kench, who's kind of a mentor and a very good friend of mine, had come into the restaurant, and I just sort of threw together a menu for him. And he started telling people that he was friends with and other chefs and stuff that they should come in and try just having a menu at Roberta's. And that ended up becoming popular, thank God. And we decided that it made sense to expand that into its own restaurant. So that's how Blanca started.
And of course, like so many other restaurants, March 2020 happens, COVID happened, shutdowns happen, Blanca closed, and then reopened 4 years later. Take me back to March 2020. Did you think you'd ever be reopening again?
I was definitely not sure if it was going to happen. I wasn't sure about where tasting menus stood in New York City anymore. I wasn't sure if people even wanted to eat this way anymore. It was definitely a tug of war with myself. And with all the other projects that we had going on, it seemed less and less feasible. And it was not something I was willing to do unless I was able to find a partner that could actually do the job and do justice to the restaurant. And Victoria is that person.
Enter Victoria. What made you want to join this project as executive chef?
I mean, I think one of them, it was just such an unlikely situation to happen in general. Obviously I've known about Carlo. I had, a friend, we used to work here for him, and I came to a restaurant like 3 times. I'm not a big fan of working in Brooklyn in general, so I've been much more focused always in Manhattan. So I think it's like funny, I think when things are very kind of weird, and I don't know whether the rationale makes sense of it in my brain, okay? Like in my opinion, like all my very close friends, they're like, this makes sense. And I'm like, does it? I was like, I don't know. And then, closing Mena was really hard. I mean, and to be honest, I dealt with a lot of just kind of like I felt embarrassed when that happened. Dealing with kind of a lot of emotions. I'm a very emotional person in that sense. And then just kind of tired of the ups and downs. And, I think sometimes you struggle with like, where the hell is everything going? But I thought I was like, why would Carlo be interested in me? So I got a phone call from a friend of mine, a friend that we have in common. And then he's like, it makes so much sense. I can't believe I didn't think about it. So he was upset at himself for not thinking about the idea. And then she kind of connected us, and it took like 9 or 10 months, I think, on conversations. Extremely busy person over here. So then I was saying, I don't think it's going to happen. But I thought it was just interesting. Obviously, I had fond memories. I always thought that it's one of the few restaurants that actually had such a insignia of being a chef's tasting menu. Not the BS of like, this is a restaurant and you have a tiny, tiny kitchen, but it is a chef tasting menu. It is a chef-driven restaurant, and you don't have the equipment, you don't have the infrastructure to actually develop what you need to do. So part as a chef, and I think in general, when I've ever worked for someone, being an executive chef is being just plainly an investor, and the point of view is just so different. And I think all of those things, all those the elements together kind of make sense in my head. And then I was obviously apprehensive, but I think in general, I've always jumped into things that I've been slightly scared and apprehensive about.
Going back to what you said about working for an investor versus a chef, Carlo, what did you see in Victoria as a chef that made her the right executive chef for Blanca in 2024?
From a culinary perspective, we have a very similar vantage point. I think we articulate things in the same way. We have a very similar aesthetic. We let ingredients speak for themselves while still having a voice. And I think that's really, really important. And especially in this restaurant, it doesn't have to be my voice anymore, but it has to be someone's voice.
And how do you, Victoria, establish your voice, and how do you collaborate? What's the balance between when someone's eating here, they're eating a Victoria Blamey dish versus a Victoria Blamey dish with a Carlo Mirarchi dish?
Well, I mean, I think with time, I think it's interesting to see the moment when we opened, that was January, till now that we're almost in September. I think it's more about the guest, sort of what the expectations they have. Obviously, at the beginning, I was much more timid. Can you get on that? About trying to understand how to represent the brand. I am very aware that when you're in another place that is not your own, kind of like, how do you balance, the space, the identity of that space, and then your own identity. And I think Carlo, this was a long time ago, he said to me, this is almost like what you'd be waiting your whole life situation. And I think part of that is very true. I can be myself here. There's obviously a very blurry line of what is the guest, the chef, the kitchen, the front, the back. And I think in that aspect, it can be interesting, but it can also be obviously intense, because of emotions and obviously the energy in that room. But I just feel like it's almost impossible that your own personality is not going to be part of it,
And then how do you feel, Carlo, as a chef yourself? Have you had to pull back and let Victoria do her thing? Or?
It's sort of like watching someone drive your car. And in the beginning, you're nervous, and you are very, very, you're like, did you warm it up for like all that kind of stuff? And then in the end, not in the end, but as things move forward, you're like, that's a sleek automobile. I like the way it sounds. I like the way it looks. I like the way it smells. Yeah.
So what is the Blanca brand? Victoria mentioned it. Is that something that you defined at the beginning and had her cook to, or is that an ever-evolving idea?
I think it's ever-evolving. There's definitely, I think, an approach to the food and a certain system of values that we apply to what we do. But it should always be evolving. You should always be challenging yourself. We should be challenging ourselves. We should be trying to be better with each service. And, being stagnant is not something that works for us.
We'll get to the dining experience in just a second. But Carlo, I want to go back to something you said about the consumer appetite, no pun intended, for a tasting menu. We've heard so much about inflation, which I'm sure you both see as you're sourcing ingredients. But when you think about pricing, when you think about opening a restaurant that's doing a chef's tasting menu, how did you make that decision, and how do you think about the pricing of this?
So it's definitely something you want to take in consideration. And I think that the attitude of diners have shifted a bit, and this is not necessarily the way that people want to celebrate restaurants as often as they once did. However, when it comes to actually being able to express your cuisine and your food and have a total experience, that a tasting menu is kind of the only way to really do it, because it allows you to really have a rhythm and a balance in all your flavors and ingredients and how you approach the entire meal from start to finish. It just allows you that control that I think you kind of need. Even personally, myself, I'm not someone that goes out to eat tasting menus. If I do, it's very, very rare. So it's obviously something very specific, something that is catering to a very specific audience. But I do think it is a necessary part of, or an important part of, the culinary tradition, and also is something that drives gastronomy forward.
Let's talk about the dining experience. Obviously, hyper-seasonal, hyper-local, the menu evolves. But broadly speaking, what can someone expect when they come in to eat your food here?
Definitely there is hyper-local, but I think in general, there's more about quality also of produce and product. I don't mean this in a sort of bourgeois way. I mean in like, trying to find what is the best olive oil that we think is going to go with this dish, what is the best, fish that I think will go with the sauce that we're making. I think in general, for sure, it tends to people to think, that a tasting menu has to be bourgeois and it has to be sort of for like creme de la creme or the top of the 1% or whatever. I don't think the food has to reflect that. I do think that the produce has to be obviously important, because you speak through that. I do think that also it is not that easy to do that in general. So I think people have to expect, great produce, but also something fun and something different to actually see and eat. I think it's not about something that it's not about being simplistic or not. I think it's more the approach of like, oh, this is fun. I haven't tried this way before. Oh, I haven't had, this sauce that is very traditional with XYZ on it. This is really unique. So in the sense of like, is there anything really so original these days? I'm not sure. I don't think really anything we do these days is like, oh, I never seen this before. I think the wheel keeps like turning around and around and kind of shifting. It's like fashion. Mm-hmm. But it really truly is not like the moment of like Ferran and coming out with, SIS, the guns and the spumas and, all the stuff that happened, I remember in the 2000s. So, but you still have creativity. Creativity, it is still part of reinvention. So I think people are supposed to be on an adventure. It is not for someone, definitely, that wants to just have a very traditional meal. That's not what Blanca is meant to be. But it's also not about trying hard. It's about deliciousness, I think. If something also can be aesthetically appealing, great. But it's a combination of all those, I hope if we can achieve that,
Whenever I'm in the kitchen helping out, she always looks at me like I'm going to go and plate something, and I'm not plating that. I'll stick to the grill. I'm not plating anything.
Wait, why? Because it's not.
I just don't like plating.
Oh.
So I'm not very good at it, to be honest.
Oh, that's so funny.
Oh, the first we were doing Friends of the Family, I was like, I wonder, you always have this. It is interesting working with another chef because obviously I work with many, but under them, right? And there's obviously a great deal of admiration. If not, that partnership wouldn't work. But you never know. You're always a little afraid of what area you were kind of like, just about to enter. So I was like, I wonder how is he gonna get involved plating, and then of course, you're very, the dishes that you make and how I feel about them, they're your children. So you're very kind of almost protective when you're like, no, it's not like that. And then you start letting go, obviously, and try to teach people like, that's not the best way to do it. But there's so many emotions, So at the beginning I was like, what is he gonna do? I was like, what is he gonna do now? But then he was just so chill. He was so relaxed, I put way more, I'm more hyper about it. I'm not bipolar in that sense to be like, I'm going to shift my moods during a service, thankfully, But, I do definitely have a really focus, like, oh no, this has to be that way, And then I'm like, okay, it's fine. That wasn't the time. But then he was just very comforting. So it was just really funny whenever he was coming here to grill.
You talk about the lamb coming on and off and the most touched piece of meat, and without giving away the house secrets, for a tasting menu like the one that you are creating, I imagine there's so many steps behind the scenes that diners can't even comprehend are happening. Yeah, can you talk about that process a little bit? Like, how much more work is going on than what we see?
I mean, a lot, but I don't think there's secrets, I don't believe in secrets. I've been lucky that even though of the hardships of my career. You know, I never had anyone not telling me how things worked, that a question wasn't answered, that someone didn't tell me a recipe, that, you know, so I don't work that way either. You know, I don't think someone asked me, usually we have a lot of diners that are really curious, you know, like right now we have a tomato that is like dehydrated for 14 hours and we warm again, then has sherry amontillado, then it has like glaze, and it's just more than I'm like, do you really want to know all the steps? Because I can be here like for a good 5-10 minutes to tell you how this tomato came to be. So I find it that the less people know, the better, just to not sound obnoxious of like why we're doing it that way. But in general, the food that I make is not intentional, does have layers, you know, and the layers are meant to express flavor. Mm-hmm. So I think, you know, there's prep that we all do. We're only 4 people with me. So it's a very small team to achieve the things that we want to do. And I think the team that we have is absolutely incredible. They're very passionate. They're young, you know, and they have great values and interests of the cuisine, apart from being great individuals, to be honest with you. So we all have you know, there's moments obviously that sometimes you're frustrated or tired, mainly because someone's tired, that you're like trying to maybe cut up order or something. I'm like, hey, you know, it's so intentional what you do that it can get a little bit overwhelming. So yeah, there's process, there's fermentation, you know, there's dehydration, you know, we work with great product, we do our own sorbet with our fruit, you know, we try to work on new things and might be attempt and a failure, I don't know. So, and nothing's really a secret, you know. The bread, for example, a good friend of mine helped me actually do it. I'm not a baker. I love baking bread, though. I didn't really early in my career, and I suffer a lot because the chef was mad at me all the time. I had to do 15 different loaves of different bread. It was a disaster. I nearly got fired, and it was my internship. I was like, wait, I can get fired? I was like, I'm working for free. But, you know, so I think a lot of that is what we bring in here, and the desire to even do more. You know, sometimes you just have to come to the reality and the realization of like, yeah, I can't grow my own tea, I get it. So I want to, you know, pair that with the best producer we have. So see, what is that collaboration? I think collaborating with people that you admire and people that do great things is one of the luckiest things that we do here. And I thoroughly enjoy it. Yep.
So I think a good way to make guests understand, or people understand in general, is that for every one dish that's on the menu as a complete dish, there's 10 that didn't get on. So you multiply that by 19, 20, 15, whatever amount of courses it is, you realize how many iterations you end up having of certain dishes, or how much just straight up attempts you make that fail. And that's how you learn.
That's really interesting. So they're not on the menu because they failed, or because you took a vote and decided what made the menu is better?
There's no voting. But no, I mean, what something that I learned a long time ago is that if you're going to take something off a menu, the thing that replaces it has to be better. And if something isn't good enough, you have to have an honest conversation with yourself and realize that you can do better.
Yeah, I mean, I think that also those dishes in general, to be honest, it's like there's very different the moment when you're working on a menu when you're reopening, which I did 5 tastings with Carlo, and I was like, then one of the tastes was really great, and we start picking, and it's true that you get into the nitty gritty of it, but the moment you're opening, things are a little bit more fluid, and I think there's a conversation with yourself. And also, here I think there's something wonderful too that is not, and I mean this with so much respect, we're not Noma in the sense of like, I don't have 20 people. So there's no bit pressure of like every single pie someone's going to go and have has to be absolutely perfect. In general, it's something that is really good. But when we're changing something, sometimes it might change throughout a week,
Oh, interesting.
And at one point you're like, okay, I think it makes more sense if we put it right here on the menu and then instead of somewhere else, and also seeing the diner, sometimes the experience with that, for sure, you see them, how they interact with something. If it's awkward for them, you got to adjust.
It's immediate. Yeah. You get immediate gratification.
Yeah.
For better or worse. It's not always gratification.
That's a little scary.
But it does. You have an incredible insight into the food and how people, like Victoria said, how people eat it is a huge part of the experience. And sometimes in your head, you're not the one eating it for the most part, or you're tasting it constantly, but you're not sitting down.
You're not sitting down, you don't have the cutlery, it's different, So at one point, for example, a few days ago, I see someone that was like, I think they're struggling with this tomato. It's like leather. I was like, okay, we got to change a knife, but it is one of the positive outcomes of having such an open kitchen, that you see things. Problem too is like, I will see everything, like sometimes it can be like, okay, I should not, I'm just going to move away. Just put the blinders on. See someone just push a dish that I had once, and I was like, oh, okay, I guess she didn't like it.
It's so interesting, though, because as a diner and as someone who is not always the most confident cook, when I have trouble cutting something or when I'm not tasting the notes that I think I should be tasting, I assume the problem is me. And it took a friend who went to culinary school telling me, like, no, trust your taste buds.
Right.
Also, it's okay just to not like something.
And also, to be honest with you, they get trained. My taste buds were not the same that when I was, 8 years old. So also it's an exercise, the more you eat, the more you burn out. I mean, when I was a younger cook, gosh, I used to spend all my money going out to eat, in England when I was working there. So you want to try a lot. You want to try everything. And then at one point, no. Now you don't want to go out to a tasting menu. And you actually are so in tune with a lot of things and everything that you're like, okay, this is just for technique and it shouldn't really, I'm not going to really say anything, but it was not an enjoyable meal. And you try, the other day we had a really cool, we always have a first meeting here at noon when the cooks are here. And I said, what happens when you have a so-so experience? I said, how do you evaluate that? Instead of being just saying bad or good. How do you give constructive criticism to a meal that probably could have been better and what failed, And then the answers are usually, something that has to rely on the cooks, obviously, on the flavor, the heat, and the elements of technique. And I thought it was a really interesting sort of meeting to have because you want to not only have fun when you go out and eat, but when you're a younger cook, you also want to be like, okay, why didn't I like this? Is it the combination of the flavors? Is it the technique that's poor? Is it also that my pasta is overcooked? Why is my pasta overcooked when they're only doing 30 covers?
Yeah, is it technically wrong? Is it conceptually wrong? Does it just not appeal to me?
How much are you thinking about pushing diners' palates forward when you're putting together a dish? I mean, we talked about the feedback that you get here.
I mean, generally a lot, but obviously, again, it has to be tasty. Unless something is like, I don't know. I mean, some people, we had this nail pasta forever on the menu. And not everybody not everyone was just like, wow, it's amazing. But then it's funny, the more covers we're doing, the time has passed, people love the dish. Is it an easy one to eat? I mean, you gotta love snails, but it's not a snails that is typical with ton of butter and garlic. So they had lavender, it had a story behind. I was at this place in Bobbio with this guy that had lavender and snails and blah, blah, blah. So, that to me was also interesting because that I think represents a lot of the beginning of like the reopening with Carlo and myself. And I started to understand how he would see food. And I was so surprised that he liked it. I was really nervous to do pasta for him. I've done pasta before. I've learned. I'm not a pasta person, And definitely I don't see for me to do pasta here. It's like, I'm going to do, eggplant and peppers, I mean, that's not what I had when I was here. And I don't mean in a bad way. I just mean like, this is what we do here. Some things, a different perspective. Do you want to put your finger on it? You can try. That's not why I'm serving you that. It's not for you to say, oh, this is French. There's some people that they think they know and good for them. But yeah.
So we have a lot of synergy. This is a good example. So where my dad is from in Calabria, snails are used in pasta traditionally. They're foraged and everything. So we're talking one day and she just says, oh, I want to do a snail pasta. I'm like, fucking great. Let's go. Perfect.
I know. I thought he was like, I'm not sure. Yeah. And then we went into, then he's like, there's snails in a garden. So, after he said that to me, this is almost like 6 months open. I was like, okay, you guys need to say snails in a garden. They're like, no. Well, because for me, it was like I wanted to put herbs that the snails eat. But then at the same time, the snails that I saw in Bobbio, that were in this beautiful garden in front of this beautiful lavender field, next to like all these apiaries, it was like a dream sort of land. I didn't get it why people would fall in love with Italy and places like that. Sometimes I feel like New York, it has, that image of like something takes you back. It's hard, it's such a cosmopolitan city with so much concrete, that you can be involved, maybe in something that's not that amazing, but the landscape and everything's going to take you to that place and just be just in love with it. Here, you have to create that experience with different things, It's a city, it's one of the most important cities in the world, that is all about, I can get anything, right? Doesn't mean that it's always going to be a great food experience. I don't know. Some people, they want to have, one person and a couple have said, well, I don't see the storytelling here. And they were kind of bothered, and I was like, well, I get it. They want to think that their meal has to make sense from A to Z. And why? Do you know me? Do you know Carlo? Does it make sense for you that I'm not supposed to give you a trip of Chile? I'm not in Chile. If I were in Chile, I would definitely have to have the pressure to represent something that is more local. If I were where Fabican was, the same. I think here it's like you take yourself to expose that,
We started this conversation talking about Blanca reopened after 4 years. Carlo, what was the hardest part about reopening after?
Everything. That's my answer.
You have received critical acclaim, though, as I learned right before we started filming. We cannot say that you have a Michelin star because you had 2 Michelin stars before you closed, but now you have to re-earn it.
Now we got to claw 'em back.
Well, I was going to ask about the critical reception, right? The New York Times has rated you tremendously highly, the New Yorker, rave reviews across food media. How much do you think about the critical reception when building the restaurant, when building the menu?
No comment.
I think you think about it more at the beginning, and then you're got in a much more different space. I mean, it will be a lie to say that you don't think about it, because you know what? It's not so much that you cook for the reviews or you want to have a place with those reviews. It's also that you think about business.
There's economics.
Yeah, definitely. I think people sometimes they don't want to talk about the truth, but New York is a place of business. You did not come here to just the love of art. You know what I mean? It's, of course, a love for the cuisine, a love for gastronomy, and all of this, but the hardest thing to do in New York is to stay alive and open. I've seen it firsthand. He knows me. I text him sometimes. I was like, I'm a very highly worried person about these things, And I think, of course, critics bring you people. Do they bring you the right people all the time? Not necessarily, but they bring people. You need it's pretty much the thing of like years and years ago. You're a painter. You need someone to basically to paint for them. Yeah, you need them. So it's a relationship that it goes both ways. So you definitely think about it at the beginning. I think that later, we were extremely happy and surprised about the number 2. But then you just start thinking about what's our own standard, what's our own, where are we going forward tomorrow? What are we doing today and tomorrow? Not further than that. And then what's summer, what's winter.
It's an ecosystem, effectively.
Definitely. I mean, I think it's, if not here, is the most obvious place to see it, that anywhere else. Definitely.
How long did it take for momentum to build, or was it from day one on reopening? People were eager to see you back.
Definitely a slow to start, but I think that allowed us to get comfortable and.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, like, the beginning was like, some people didn't know we were open. So, they reopened. It was the whole thing of like, it's fine. And then definitely, obviously, when we made it on the number 2 and the times that changed. And then that was just fully booked. I would say also that when Helen's review, that also changed, in a good way. The people that we got from like the week right after the review, there were people like some from Spain, some from I can't remember where, and they're like so different. I really loved it, because a lot of people said to me, you're such you're such a trooper to take that review so well. And I'm like, okay, I was like, oh my God. I said, was it a bad review? I said, because I remember texting Carlo, I think I was about to go to Copenhagen just for like 36 hours. And I'm like, it took me like a second time and a third time to read it. And I said, no, I think it's actually good. I said, are you happy? He said, I'm extremely happy. And then people would be like, I'm so sorry. I was like, okay, shit, I thought it was actually good. And the people were like, yeah, I just wanted something different. I don't want to eat the same thing.
I was going to say, I read that review. I didn't think it was negative.
Eat caviar and sea urchin.
Right. So, you know, we do sea urchin, it's a ceviche, you know. I mean, one of the things that, like, obviously speaking to who we are. So I will say that, of course, those things are necessary, you know. We don't do it for it. That's the fun thing. It would be really wrong to start cooking because that's what you want, but maybe some people do. I think you're lucky when you can still express your art, and that's what we do.
All right, I know you have to go, but one final question for you, Carlo, because you have Roberta's. I saw the news that Roberta's is opening in Miami. You have Fowl Witch in the East Village. How do you think about expanding your chef footprint?
We base it on our staff and our teams. And when we have individuals that we think are ready for the next step in their career, we try to build something around them.
Thank you both so much for sitting down. I know you are incredibly busy.
Thanks for spending time with us.
Yeah.